In the previous demonstration, you have learned how to write and run a unit test with MS Test. Now let's write and run a unit test with XUnit. In this demonstration, we also look at how to use parameters for a test method. You will also learn how to configure XUnit with a JSON file. Okay, so let's switch to Visual Studio. Here I've opened up my ThomasMathLib and I've already here the MS Test unit testing project. Now let's add another project with the tests that are written with XUnit. To create a unit test library with XUnit, I just add a new project and I choose a normal class library. I give that one the name ThomasMathLib tests XUnit. Okay, and the class here, I call it calculator tests XUnit. Yes, I also want to rename the class here. Alright. Now to write tests with XUnit, I need to reference the XUnit assemblies in that class library. To do this, I right-click on References and I select Manage NuGet Packages. In the NuGet Package Manager, I go to Browse and I type in here XUnit. Now you see here comes up the XUnit NuGet package and I click on Install to get the latest stable version. Here you see all the dependent packages that are installed with this XUnit package. I click OK to install these packages. Now I see in my references I have here XUnit Assert, XUnit Core and so on. So now I can go to my calculator tests and I can write the test. As I'm a lazy developer, I just go to the MS Test library and I copy that test method. That's a good approach to see what is different in XUnit. Okay, so the first thing is we need to reference our ThomasMathLib to get the calculator class. So let's add a reference here and let's choose the mathlib. Okay, now we can resolve that. The next thing is that the test method attribute doesn't exist in XUnit. In XUnit, the attribute for a test method is called fact. Because that's a fact, the add method should return the sum of the values. Now you see here, the assert class is already found, and this is the assert class of XUnit. But it doesn't have an requal method. Instead, the method in XUnit is just called equal. Okay, now that code compiles. Now let's swap to the Test Explorer and let's run all my tests. We don't see any XUnit test here. This is just the test from the MS Test project. To see the tests of third-party libraries in the Test Explorer, you need to install the test runners. For XUnit, the test runners are also available as a NuGet package. So again, I can right-click on the references here and say Manage NuGet Packages. Here you see a package that is called XUnit Runner Visual Studio. So I just install this package here. Okay, now it's installed. I go again to the Test Explorer and I say Run All. And now you see the XUnit project pops up as well, and here the test method is executed and it's green. Okay, cool. So we have our first XUnit test method. Now let's look at how we can parameterize the test method with XUnit. When you look at the test method that we have written, you see that we just pass two integer values to the add method of the calculator, and then we have here another integer value for the expected result. We are just testing one single calculation. Now we could write multiple unit tests to do more calculations. In XUnit, we can also parameterize our test method for this. So let's do this. Let's start with this expected result. We add a parameter for that value, and we call it expected result. So we replace now this 5 with that parameter. And now we also need parameters for the values that we pass to the add method. Okay, so I have two integers and I replace those two here with value 1 and value 2. Okay. Now to pass in the parameters, I need to change the fact attribute into a theory attribute. Now the test is no more a fact, it's a theory. Because if it's green or red, theoretically depends on the input data that you provide. To provide the input data for the test method, you can use XUnit's inline data attribute. As you can see, its constructor is taking an object array with the params keyword, and the data values of this object array are passed to the test method. So now I say, okay, the expected result is 5 and that's 2 plus 3. Alright, I just copy that line and I make another inline data attribute, and here I can say, for example, the expected result is 10 and I want to calculate 4 plus 6. Let's do another one. Let's say here expected result is 2 and I say here 5 and minus 3. Alright. So now we have a parameterized test method. Now let's run this in the Test Explorer. Now you see, under the XUnit test, we have 3 test methods that pop up because we have parameterized this. So now we have created 3 tests. Now one thing I don't like so much now is that XUnit is displaying the full qualified class name in front of the test method name. We can configure this in XUnit by adding a JSON file to our XUnit test project. So let's right click on the project here and let's say add new item. I want to add a JSON file, so I search for JSON and I need to name it xunit.runner.json. You can read this in the XUnit documentation. Now as you can see, when I add that file with this name, I have here already a schema that points to XUnit GitHub IO. So I have IntelliSense for the things that I can adjust. In my case, I want to set the method display attribute, and as you can see there are 2 options, class and method only. Class and method is the default. I want to choose method. Now I need to go to the properties of that file and I need to set copy to output directory to copy if newer. Alright, now let's run the tests again in the Test Explorer, and now we only see the method names. In the case of a parameterized test, you see here that the method names include the parameters that have been passed in. So here you see the expected result is 10 and value 1 is 4 and value 2 is 6. And when we look at the other tests, we see different values. Okay, so far so good. Now you have learned how to write a unit test with XUnit with the fact attribute, and you have also learned how to write a parameterized test with a theory and inline data attributes. In addition, you have seen how to add an XUnit runner JSON file to configure XUnit. Now let's talk about what a good structure of a unit test is before we add an XUnit test project to the FriendStorage application. In the previous demonstration, we have written a unit test for the calculator class that is called it should return sum of values. Implicitly, we have used a good structure of a unit test, which is always arrange, act, and assert. So in the first step, we arrange what we need for the test. In the demonstration, this was just a calculator instance. Then we act on that instance by calling the add method, and finally we assert that the result we got is the expected one. If you follow this pattern, arrange, act, assert, you will always have a good structure of a unit test. Okay, so far to unit testing. Now let's add a test project to the FriendStorage application before we continue with test-driven development. In this demonstration, we add a test project to the FriendStorage solution. We will use XUnit as a testing framework, and we will create a test class for the navigation view model. Okay, so let's switch to Visual Studio. Here I've opened the FriendStorage solution. Now let's right-click on the solution to add a new project. I want to add a new class library that contains our test methods. So I just name the class library FriendStorage UI Tests. Okay. From the test project, I remove the class1 file here. So let's delete that one. As I want to use XUnit, I right-click on the references and I select Manage New Get Packages. I click on the Browse button and I type in XUnit. I install the XUnit package and I also install the package XUnit Runner Visual Studio. Okay. Then, as we want to test the view models that are part of the FriendStorage UI project, I create a reference to that project. So I right-click here again and I say Add Reference and I reference FriendStorage UI. Okay. The next thing I want to ensure is that the test methods of this project are displayed in the Test Explorer without the class name. So I add a JSON file to configure XUnit. So let's say here, add new item, and I type in JSON. I select the JSON file, and I need to name it XUnit runner.json, like you have seen it before in the XUnit demonstration. Okay, I add that file. And in this file, I say that the method display should be method only. Okay. In addition, I need to go to the properties of that file and I need to say here, copy to output directory if newer. Okay. So now we have the test project set up with XUnit, and now let's add a test class for the navigation view model of the FriendStorage application. So usually in the test project, I create the same structure as in the real project. So here in my test project, I also create a view model folder. So let's do this. Let's say here, add new folder. And I name that folder view model. In that view model folder, I create a navigation view model tests class that will contain the tests for this navigation view model. So let's right-click again and let's say add new class. And I name the class navigation view model tests. Okay, and let's make the class public. Alright, now we have set up a test project in the FriendStorage solution. And we have a class where we can put in the tests for the navigation view model. Before we start writing these tests, let's take a look at the basics of test-driven development.